हमारे नए वीडियोस को देखने के लिए YouTube के ऐप पर बेल आइकन को क्लिक कीजिए।
I mean, Picasso had a saying, he said, good artists copy, great artists steal. I've been shameless about stealing great ideas.
Now here's a video I've been wanting to make for a while. Let's go all the way back in time, before we had those massive phones, fancy displays, and all those crazy features in phones. Let's take it back to the basics, the originals. What started it all? This is the first Android phone ever versus the first and original iPhone. Also on their respective original firmwares. So I've got Android 1.0 preloaded and iPhone OS 1.0. Who? Let's just get a sense of what started it all. That's exactly what I want this video to accomplish. Now, Steve Jobs was pretty shameless when it came to copying. However, when it came to someone copying his creation, he did not like it. Lawsuits and more lawsuits. So it's a bit ironic, but we can definitely tell that both of these phones have a very similar appearance. A massive display that dominates the front of the phone. So this is actually a little bit funny because in terms of specs, just raw specs, the iPhone in some areas outdoes the Android phone. Nowadays, that's very rare to see that in most areas, but the iPhone actually had the larger display. It's funny for me to say that. 3.5 inches at 480 by 320 resolution. So that means the Google G1, which has the same resolution, is a little bit sharper with a 3.2 inch display, but I gotta say the iPhone is definitely the clear winner here. It blends seamlessly with the front of the phone. It's a cleaner look, whereas on the G1, it has this weird appearance to it. You can't turn it very well. You can't see. There's not much viewing angle to it whatsoever. So it's definitely a win for the iPhone on the display. And let's talk hardware for a minute. So I gotta say, there's no way that Google copied Apple in terms of hardware. It's just night and day difference here. The iPhone is almost twice as thin. It's got only one input, whereas the HTC G1, this dream phone, can't make up its mind what it wants to be. Does it want to be a fully touchscreen phone, or does it want to be navigated like a BlackBerry with a little scroll wheel down here, or a actual keyboard to control some things in case you get bored with the other two input sources? So it's a little bit of an identity crisis, doesn't really know what it is. I guess it worked well. A lot of people did like this guy having the choice, but Apple just said no. Only a touch display, no stylus, nothing like that. And in the end, it really worked out. I mean, look at every Android phone today. It's just like that. On the back, we do have a tiny and minuscule camera. On the bottom, we have this plastic covering the antenna bands. Basically, how you take the phone apart is from this guy. Of course, it's non-removable, whereas on this guy, you can take it out, replace the battery, even add an SD card up to 8 gigabytes. A clear advantage the iPhone had was a headphone jack built into the phone. You don't need an adapter. Well, take that back. You actually do need one. So it was recessed. This was in order to keep other people from using headphones with it. Only Apple branded headphones would fit in here. We do have a machined Apple logo, what stemmed and inspired the later iterations, which is very nice. So very simple and clean design. This one definitely stands the test of time a little bit better. This one, it looks like a weird L or J. I don't know. It definitely conforms to your hand. Does feel pretty comfortable, but it's creaky, plasticky. It's just not the same design and build quality wise. Now, because I am on the original version of Android, there is no on-screen keyboard. That only came in later versions. If you try and select an input field, nothing really happens. So you do have to go into landscape mode every single time. And take note, this is in 2008. So you really didn't get a choice. You had to use the physical keyboard. Later on, they realized, well, that's not such a great idea if I want to compete with Apple. So they put an on-screen keyboard on the display, but it was tiny. It's a little bit more cramped. This one definitely felt more natural. And ever since the beginning, I'm very impressed just how well you can type on the iPhone display. And the interesting thing is this isn't even the original design of the first Android phone. That one was a little different because when the iPhone came out, I actually was reading about an interview. A lot of the Android executives, the people that were planning the original Android phone, just lost all hope. There was no way their crappy BlackBerry ripoff could compete with the iPhone, so they had to go ahead and reimagine and bring this beautiful design instead. So while the iPhone may have led in the hardware race, I gotta give it to Android when it comes to software. It was just so much more advanced. Let's start at the lock screen. So what is the point of a lock screen? Just an area to see your notifications, to get a little sense of what's going on before you enter the phone. And both did it pretty well, but the funny thing is, on the first version of Android, you couldn't use a wallpaper on the lock screen. On iOS or iPhone OS at the time, you couldn't use a wallpaper on the background of the home screen. So why that is, that reverse effect, who knows? But of course, we have the famous slide to unlock, and I gotta say, I think the iPhone did that so much better. It's iconic, it's recognizable. It's sad that it's gone now, but it was so nice at the time. Here you just have to click a button. It's not the same. Eventually they added a slide to unlock, but on the first version of Android, it was just a click. So to unlock, we do have a choice of what we want, a passcode, a pattern. So this was pretty cool. This was a big iconic feature of Android. So if I can get this working, there it is. Now, what would an iPhone be without a lock screen bypass? This is so funny because I will show you the very first lock screen bypass in existence that shipped with the original firmware on the iPhone. This is seriously too funny. So I just showed you guys one on iOS 10.2 a little bit ago. Here's the very first one that ever existed. So you have a passcode. How do you get into the phone and actually use so much inside of it without it? Just go to emergency call, hold the power button, and while you're doing that, just call 911 or 112 and click done on here. This will slide down, click cancel, and it didn't work this time. Let's try it again. So 112, call, and once again, there you are. So you're in the contact. So what can you do from here? You can make calls. You can actually go into the Messages app. You can go into Maps, you can go into Safari, you can literally do anything. As long as you go in here and type in an email, you can even go into email. You could bypass the passcode on the first version of the iPhone. And by the way, look, I'm in the browser right now. If I go back, I'm at the lock screen. I think we're a bit spoiled when it comes to our phones nowadays. We just take for granted what we didn't have back in the day. A lot of kids that are watching this right now that are growing up knowing the phones that are out today, you guys probably never had any idea that you couldn't even have pages on the original version of iOS or iPhone OS. I keep mixing those up. You literally could not move your apps. When you clicked the home button, the only thing it did was click home. Kids these days, they'll never understand home button was just a goddamn home button. You can't open up multitasking because it didn't exist at the time on iPhone. And that's where Android starts stepping things up, as you did have a way to multitask. If you go ahead and click the home button and hold it, you can actually choose between several last used apps. So no Siri, no multitasking, nothing like that. No moving apps around, no pages, no spotlight, nothing. You just get what's given and be happy with it. Your time to shine, baby. So not only did you have multitasking, you had an app drawer where you can find organized all of your applications. This still exists in new versions of Android right now. That's how iconic this was. Also, notifications. This only came in a much later version of iOS. That's iOS 5, I believe. And this came in the first version of Android. And Android actually had the control center years in advance of Apple. In a way, this menu button right here did bring up secondary controls, and on the home screen, this is like a little mini control center here. You could actually change the wallpaper, add widgets, something you could not do on this one even. And get this, you can actually move around apps. This is before Apple implemented it into their phone. So you might say, where did Apple get some of these features? Now, granted, these didn't wiggle like Apple's do, but you could still move them around. You could even delete them from the home screen right there. That is really neat. That customization was present since the beginning on Android. And the craziest thing was that the App Store came after the Android Play Store. It was called the Market at the time. So this was so advanced at the time. You could actually download applications, games, right from the get-go. You didn't have to wait a year to get the Apple Store or the App Store on the iPhone. So that's a bit impressive how much further, how much more advanced Android was versus iPhone OS back in 2008. Now on paper, the iPhone was officially a little bit slower, 412 megahertz versus 528 on the HTC G1. It also had about 2/3 of the RAM of the HTC G1, so it definitely was underpowered. Let's see on a Geekbench how they compare. I fooled you guys, Geekbench. By Geekbench, I mean photos, because there's no way to run these applications now on these phones. But this is the original Geekbench for these phones. Now, the iPhone was on 3.1.3, and this was on the latest version of Donut. So the iPhone was actually quite the powerhouse. It was very well optimized, and did very well in the Geekbench score. This one just got 82, so a very, very good job on the iPhone's part, even though it had weaker specs. And that's still the case for the iPhone today. And believe it or not, Android actually sucked on battery life back in the day. 1150 milliamps versus 1400, and the iPhone with its optimization did better. So definitely a win for the iPhone. And lastly, let's talk about those cameras. So 3.2 megapixel shooter on this guy and 2 on the iPhone. So let's launch the camera application here. And sadly, there is no vertical like this. You had to take all of your pictures in landscape on the G1. So both are very muddled, dark. This one is officially a little bit better, but see for yourselves, guys, which of the two is better. Leave a comment down below which one, camera quality wise, you think is the one, because it is a very tough call between both. If you want to look at your pictures, you can actually jump into the pictures from both just like this. If you want to go back, just like that. So very similar on those fronts. And there you go, guys. Those are the two phones that started it all, the first Android and first iPhone. Hope you guys did enjoy this video. Let me know what you think down below. Which is the winner at the time? Which one would you choose, or which one did you choose at the time? Why? I'm just kind of curious to see you guys' thoughts. And I do hope you guys enjoyed this trip back to what started it all. Peace.